Hey, this is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is 29 November 2021, and I am in Arlington, Virginia, interviewing Nancy Hovey.
Yes.
I got that right? Okay. Nancy, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? That kind of thing.
Okay, I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, born and raised. When I started college, I wanted to get far, far away, so I went to the University of South Carolina on a Navy ROTC scholarship.
Okay. And why Navy?
It kind of fell in my lap. I want to say I was a little lazy about it. I knew I needed to pay for college, didn't know how I was going to do it. I had a former soccer coach. He was my coach my freshman year of high school, and he was a retired Navy Seabee, former Navy. I don't know if he was retired, but he put me in touch with a recruiting captain in Ohio, and I was so clueless about the military that I didn't know what it meant when Navy played Army.
Right.
So all I knew is this guy's calling to talk to me about this school that sounds terrible, and I just can't understand why I would want to go there. And he made me promise. I think about it. Okay. So I hang up the phone and said, no, this is the Naval Academy he was talking to me about. But I think from that I somehow ended up on a list of people interested in the scholarship. So someone else called me, hey, if you get the scholarship, we'll pay for your school, we'll pay for room and board, we'll give you a stipend to live on, and oh, by the way, you have a job straight out of college. And if you don't like it after your first year, you can drop and you don't owe anything back. So that sounds great. And they encouraged me to go, check out the Air Force, check out the Army, apply for all of them. And I was just like, I kind of, the Navy sounds interesting, the water, ships, I was really interested in doing marine science as a major, so I thought maybe that could tie in somehow. Nothing about the Air Force or Army really appealed to me.
Do you have any other family members who were veterans?
More extended family. So my mom's dad was a World War II veteran, and my dad's dad was in Korea. And I had uncles who were Marine, Air Force, and Army National Guard. But none of my immediate family had been military. My brother now has also, he was Army, but that he joined after, or at about the same time that I did.
Right. How about your spouse?
He's active duty Marine. Yes.
Okay. You enlisted or commissioned?
I was commissioned.
Okay. And when did you get your commission?
May of 2006.
Okay. And you said you wanted to do marine biology. Is that ultimately what you ended up doing? Or?
No, I wanted to do marine science. I think biology was where my strongest interest was. Okay. And I was thinking maybe I could be on a research ship or do something like that. And it became increasingly apparent in my first year of college that was just never going to happen. Out of our OTC, you're expected to go into a unrestricted line of warfare, so surface warfare, subs, or aviation. I ended up not going through that, but because I was medically disqualified from aviation, oddly enough, my arms were too short, which is how I ended up going intelligence. But because I wasn't going to be able to do research or anything in that field, it's a very, very demanding degree. I was like, why am I killing myself in this? I love history as well. So I switched into that, and it ended up really working out since I ended up going into intelligence. It was a more suited degree field anyway.
So you got your commission in 2006.
Yes.
Did September 11, 2001 have any impact at all on?
No,
your life?
My life, yes,
Your life,
of course.
The direction you want to go in the military, or
no,
not go?
Because for ROTC, the pipeline is so long to get the scholarship that generally high school juniors start, and so I had already started the process, and 9/11 happened the beginning of my senior year of high school. So I had already started. Of course, as soon as it happened, I knew if I got this scholarship, my life would be very different from anyone who had been serving, in my lifetime up to this point. But I had already chosen to at least pursue this scholarship before 9/11 happened.
So Navy intelligence, what does that mean?
It can mean a lot of different things. And in my, each one, I did 3 tours in the Navy, and it meant something different in each one of them. My wartime tour was Patrol Squadron 9, so that was a P3 squadron based in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. They don't exist anymore. They exist in the reserves. Active duty doesn't use them anymore. But their primary mission in OIF was what we call target development. The camera on the P3 was designed to do anti-surface warfare. It was an upgrade. The plane is designed for submarine warfare. The camera was added for surface warfare, and when they realized that those planes could be used in Iraq, it became used primarily for target development, sometimes for convoy support. So helping Army and occasionally Marine units kind of build what they want to do on the ground missions based on the intelligence that was gathered by the aircraft and by the intelligence team at the squadron and sent to the Army. But I mean, in the most broad terms, intelligence is what capabilities does the adversary have, and how do we keep our forces safe? Because that was kind of a backwards explanation,
Right.
but.
And you're in Hawaii doing this?
The squadron was stationed in Hawaii.
Okay.
Everyone, the whole squadron had to go to Iraq. There was nothing
Okay.
digital that could allow you to work
Right.
from home base while we were deployed.
So you were originally stationed in Hawaii
Yes.
with that unit?
Mm-hmm.
What year was that?
2007 to 2009.
So when you get there, who was the adversary that you were gathering intel on?
When I got to
Before you
Hawaii,
deployed, right.
okay.
So before you go anywhere, you're now in Hawaii with this unit.
I showed up to Hawaii right after they returned from a 5th Fleet deployment. So at that time, the squadron, the only squadron in 5th Fleet, was in Qatar. And they have a set schedule. And so the next deployment was supposed to be splitting the squadron and going to Sigonella in Italy and Southcom. And Sigonella, it's a fun deployment. Probably a lot of exercises and supporting the units that are in Qatar. And then in Southcom, they flew out of El Salvador, and they worked a lot with the Coast Guard and counter-narcotics altogether in the Caribbean and off the, in the Eastern Pacific. So the adversary was very gray. It wasn't really clear who it was except for drug runners. And then about 9 months later, they shuffled all the P3 forces around, and they said, okay, now you're going to Japan. And in Japan, the squadron is split, and they have some in Okinawa and some up in mainland Japan. And there, naturally, it's China. So
Right.
my job leading up to a Japan deployment was to help the squadron get familiar with Chinese ships. We called it recce. So recognizing what ship is what from the air. And maybe 6 months or so later, they shuffled all the P3 forces again and said, okay, now we're actually going to put 2 whole squadrons in 5th Fleet. There's going to be the squadron in Qatar, and there's also going to be an entire squadron in Iraq. And you guys are going to Iraq, and you're going to be the 2nd squadron to be there and do that. So at that point, you're then preparing, Iranian recce, looking at their ships, which is not much, but they're there.
Right.
And then getting familiar with what we're going to be doing in Iraq. Looking at, how often our base that we would be on is taking, rocket attacks, and just kind of looking at what the air crews that have been there previously had been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me backtrack just a little bit. What type of training do you receive to be an intel officer? You know, if you're going to work on an airplane, you learn the systems and how to turn a wrench, but how do you do it if you're going to be an intel officer? What kind of training is involved in learning that trade?
Okay, so first you spend 5 months at the, it's changed names, but at the time it was the Navy and Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center in Dam Neck, Virginia. And you go through NIOBIC, the Naval Intelligence Officer Basic Course. And the biggest chunk of it really is briefing. And you brief and brief and brief. And you learn the recce. That's part of it. You're expected to do that mostly on your own. But your enlisted sailors also know that. And frankly, the enlisted sailors are expected to know it far better than the officers. The officers are learning how to brief and how to include really the biggest thing is the so what. So I can watch CNN and get a story that you might hear in a morning brief, but we have resources that open source or the news doesn't have. So why is this important? Why is an intelligence person briefing this and not just reading the news? So you're learning to fuse together pieces of information to make it intelligence, not just information. So look at different sides of a story or a piece. Project based on what's happened before and any other information you have on what's going to happen. And why does the person you're briefing care? So based on their job, their position, whatever.
And so now that you're actually performing those duties, where your sources of intel come from? The sources you can talk about.
It's more of remembering. It's a lot of sources all over Iraq. And even while I was there, I was digging, trying to find more and more. The Army put out a lot of various Army entities. While I was there, I found a really great brief on, newer types of IEDs and ways they were rigged that we hadn't seen prior to leaving. And then also, Fifth Fleet had a daily brief that we looked at. CENTCOM had daily briefs, just kind of with what was generally happening in the area. And then there was a P3 LNO also in Qatar he didn't look at the same things he wasn't at that same level of detail, but kind of had a broader scope of the area. And actually the Russian invasion of Georgia happened when we were in Iraq, and there were Georgian soldiers in Iraq who, very quickly got sent home. So we knew something was kind of happening. I didn't really have time to look into a whole lot of it. And fortunately, the P3 LNO in Qatar called me and kind of gave me a big data dump so I could then explain it to everyone around me, our squadron as well.
Right. So you're gathering intel from multiple different sources, I guess. You're sifting through it, what's relevant, what's not, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it might even be Army intelligence
More often
that
than
you're
not.
going to get and say, okay, is this relevant to us?
Yes.
And pass that on. When were you in Iraq?
2008.
2008. What's going on in Iraq in 2008?
So while we were there, or might have been right before we left, the president had signed a new law that deployments could not exceed 1 year. I believe it was 12 months is the max. So the 82nd Airborne was the Army unit in charge of our base when we got there, and they left about a month after we got there, and 4-1 Cav came out. That law actually must have been passed right after we got there because 4-1 Cav had come out to do a 15-month deployment. So that's a long time to be over there. We were there for 6 months, so much, much different. This was definitely after spacing on the name, the big battles in the west.
Fallujah?
Fallujah, yes, sorry. This was after Fallujah and Ramadi. We did support Marine units working in Fallujah and Ramadi. It was very quiet. There was constant rocket attacks in Baghdad, in and around that area, and Mosul was ugly. I don't know that Mosul ever got, pretty until finally ISIS was quashed many, many years later. So frankly, it was pretty routine while we were there. We did a lot of target development and just kind of searching in Basra, down on the Gulf. We worked with the Brits looking for IEDs because, not IEDs, I'm sorry, rockets, because you would have the telltale rails. In theory, you should be able to see that from a P3. And then we did target development for the Army, mostly in the northeast. And then we also did some border patrols, so looking at the Syrian border and seeing if there's anyone crossing. Most often we just saw camels. So I can't say there was any real defining operations that happened while we were there. It was kind of business as usual. We did do convoy support. We did see battles and skirmishes, from the air, but nothing huge, not like a Fallujah.
So what is it like in Iraq? What do you remember the most about being
It's hot.
in the desert?
Dry. So I didn't get to leave the base because I was an intelligence officer. I sat in my containerized housing unit, my CHU, on the airfield, and then they moved us to a tent later, and we looked at the video that the plane's bringing back. And so the craziest thing, I think, is looking at these houses, because that's what you're seeing. You're seeing people's houses, because you're not looking at military targets. It wasn't a military that we were fighting. And just recognizing how different the quality of life is. It was completely normal at night for the houses are all flat top, to go and lay on the roof and sleep on the roof because it was the coolest place. A normal, I don't even know if you would call it a middle class home, but normal it's small and it's very poor, and it's just such a different culture. They don't have everything that we have there.
Right.
There probably are grocery stores, but there's far more like outdoor markets, and that's where everyone buys things. It's just completely foreign.
Right. So you didn't get a chance to interact at all with Iraqis?
No.
The average person, I guess.
No, I did not.
So, what is the tempo like? I mean, you're working every day, 12
Yes.
hours a day, or is there any downtime?
It really depended on the job. For me, I did not have a day off. There was one day I woke up vomiting and went to see medical. Can you keep down water? No. Okay, here's this shot, and it just knocked me out for about 24 hours. So I went and sent some things out, slept for 12 hours, came back, sent some more things out, slept for another 12 hours.
Right.
I'm good. And because I was the only intelligence officer, I didn't have a schedule. So I came in usually around 7, and I went home whenever. Probably early in the deployment, 11 o'clock might be normal. Later in the deployment, I was leaving earlier, probably like 9, 10 o'clock, when things were more normal, and we had a routine. My sailors also did not have days off. My shop was undermanned the entire time we were there, so they were working 12 on, 12 off. Though I was very clear. I had an M-seaman who was sent home for suicidal ideations. And he would just come in and stay and stay and stay. And I was like, go back to your room, get some sleep, because I don't need you guys getting burnout,
Right.
because I'm working longer than 12 hours every day. I need you to be fresh. So they did 12 on, 12 off for 6+ months.
So you're the only intel officer there?
Yes.
Naval intel?
Mhm.
You're, okay. Is that typical, or?
Yes.
It is?
Mhm.
Okay. Were you married at the time?
No. This was 2008.
Okay.
I got married in 2015.
Okay.
So I didn't even know my husband. In fact, my husband was in college when I was in Iraq.
Did you have any family back here that you were able to keep in touch with?
I was fortunate, actually. I had a phone in my office because
Okay.
I had an office. So I called my parents about once a week.
Right, okay.
And I talked to my brother a couple of times. My brother was, like I said, he joined about the same time I was. So he was Army National Guard. And he actually did I want to say it was a 9-month deployment right before I left. He was, I believe, in Kuwait on his way out when I was in Qatar on my way in.
Okay.
So I was able to keep in touch with him a little bit, and my parents. So I was fortunate in that.
So there, you don't have any downtime. There's no recreation at all.
No. I wanted to, get some time in the gym, and that never became part of my routine. I was able to do it every now and again, but I was busy,
Yeah.
so there was no. I wasn't, getting fat sitting at my desk. I was working the whole time.
Right. And you were there for how long?
Just over 6 months.
6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any incidents that stand out, good or bad?
No.
Anything that you remember most about your time there? Other than working all the time?
I was tired. I did promote there, so I actually have a picture of that. That's the one I was mentioning. So we had a really cool location on the airfield, and we had the Haas, the hardened aircraft shelter was right there, because this was an Iraqi base that we took over when we invaded, and then we used it for our operations. So we actually did a promotion on top of the hardened aircraft shelter with the flight line behind us there.
Okay.
So that was kind of cool. And then the ziggurat was actually on our base. It's the ancient Sumerian temple to the moon gods. And Saddam Hussein built his base there to try and kind of give that base or that airfield some protection, largely because most people are not going to try and destroy ancient structures and whatnot. And so that temple was actually between the inner and the outer wire, and for a while they closed off access to it because military members were being disrespectful and doing things that 19-year-old boys do. But fortunately they did open it back up while we were there, and we had an Iraqi tour guide who just knew everything about it. And so we were able to go walk on this ancient Sumerian temple. When you climb to the top, you have a view of the desert, but I mean the whole base is there laid out in front of you. And on that same site is the house, the foundations and the ruins of Abraham's house, Abraham from the Bible, before he started his travels. And they've actually built that up to what it would have looked like in his time, with the exception of the roof. There's no roof on it. And then there are also tombs of ancient Sumerian kings there. And we were able to wander around this site and just kind of see the ruins and everything that's been excavated. And it was very cool.
Are you able to keep up with any of the news in the United States? I mean, the war was not, at that point, very popular. I mean, people were running out of patience, I guess.
Yeah.
Were you able to keep up with any of that? Or, and was that
Yeah.
anything that bothered you or you concerned yourself with at all?
Not really.
Is it disheartening sometimes to hear that stuff?
No, because even though the war was not so popular, the American public was, and I think still is, so supportive of the military. So I'd heard the phrase, love the warrior, hate the war. And we got so much support as military members. You know, so often, if I went anywhere in uniform, people would say, thank you for your service. And, you know, the war is not popular, but, you know, it wasn't Vietnam. You know, they didn't hate the soldiers, the sailors fighting. It was odd, though, because it's 2008. We're hearing that we're going to be leaving soon. Everyone's trying to get out of this war, and we're still building up the base. You know, making quality of life adjustments to make it more comfortable. There was a green bean coffee was like the coffee restaurant they could put on little bases and stuff. One of those popped up not long before I left, and they were talking about building an internet cafe, which, I mean, it would be a tent, but
Right.
you know, place for off-duty service members to go and use the computers and everything. And I'm just going, why? You know, they're saying we're going to be leaving, but they keep building this place up.
Right.
So it's a little confusing more than anything. Yeah.
So where do you go from Iraq?
I went back to Hawaii for about 2 months, and then I PCS'd to U.S. Strategic Command in Nebraska.
Doing the same
Not
Navy
even-
intelligence?
Navy intelligence, yes, but
Completely different.
wildly different job. Yeah, not concerned with CENTCOM, not concerned with Iraq or Fifth Fleet, anything of that nature. They don't care. It's not in their purview. It's not that they don't care, but it was not strategically important.
Right. So what do you do there?
Okay, so STRATCOM at the time was primarily concerned with everything nuclear, everything in space, and everything in cyber. Cybercom didn't exist yet. Space Force certainly didn't exist yet. So for my first half of that tour, I was on the watch in the JIC, the Joint Intelligence Center. And mostly what we were looking at was strategic bombers, and submarines. So Russian, we're plotting positions of Russian submarines. We're looking at bomber deployments and bomber flights, and any sort of large missile launches, because our satellites and other collection resources can detect missile launches. So we're following those as well. And then after I left the watch floor, I went and did space intelligence for the second half of my tour there.
Where was this?
Nebraska,
In
Omaha.
Nebraska.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I assume the tempo was a lot less there than it was when you were deployed.
What's crazy is it wasn't.
It wasn't. Okay.
Yeah, I told people I felt more stress doing some of the projects there than I ever did in Iraq in a wartime environment, because it's a 4-star command and no one wants to upset the 4-star.
So are you working just for the Navy, or is this
It's a
joint command?
joint.
Okay.
Yes. So the entire time I was there, actually, the 4-star was Air Force. It was 2 different Air Force 4-stars, but Air Force the whole time.
Now, most people would look at that in the early 2000s and think, well, you know, the Soviet Union's long gone, our war's over in the Middle East. What is the concern that, you know, we're not going to get nuked by anybody?
Yeah.
But it goes deeper than that, I imagine.
Definitely. I didn't even realize how much Russia still had until I got there, and how much of a threat they did still pose. And STRATCOM is actually responsible for writing the big O plans, the operational plans on what we would do in the event of a nuclear war. And a lot of what they're doing, depending on where you work and what your specific job is, but a lot of what they're doing isn't even going to be relevant for the next 20 years. So it shouldn't be things that you're all that concerned about right now. But it would be things that would have to be kept up on and refined. You know, you can't look at something and then 20 years later pull it out and, oh, well, this was wrong. But of course, Russia's not the only adversary, and
Right.
everyone's watching China now, and there are other threats to watch. In the intelligence center, we had a North Korea team, we had a Levant team, so looking at the Levant, Israel, Jordan. We had a CENTCOM team, even though we weren't really all that concerned with what CENTCOM was doing. There was a China team, there was a Russia team, there was an India-Pakistan team. So they're watching all of that for indications and warning of potential threats, and to build operational plans, contingency plans for whatever might happen.
Right. I imagine that there's many threats out there that are concern or even keep people awake at night that are in the know that most people have no clue even exist.
Yeah.
And you get to does any of that? I'm sure a lot of that still the same threats that were there when you were there probably still exist.
And so many more.
Or more.
Yeah.
Is that something that we, in your estimation, are prepared to handle, and we're able to keep a handle on it, keep an eye on it, and stay ahead of it?
I'm not.
Or are we just lucky?
It's hard not having a clearance anymore,
right.
and not talking, at that level of detail to people that are still in those locations. So I can't know if are we staying ahead of it, but I feel like the resources that we have are so good that there's rarely a time that we're caught off guard, really. The things that make the news outlets go crazy, at least at STRATCOM, it was things we've been watching for weeks, if not months.
Right.
So I don't feel like we're necessarily going to be surprised by much, but are we able to keep up with it and actually combat that? That's a little scary, because other countries, particularly China, are able to, they can roll out submarines like donuts. It's a communist country, and we can't do the same thing. So a little disconcerting not having the insight to wonder, are we prepared? So I don't know. It's a mixed bag.
Were we prepared when you were in the know?
I think so. It's, for example, like I said, we watched Russian strategic bombers, and we were able to see when they took off, where they were. We were able to scramble jets if they were getting near the U.S. and basically kind of meet them out, next to our air defensive international zone, and kind of push them off, I guess is the best thing.
So when we hear these reports that a Russian bomber has, skirted our airspace in Alaska, for instance, that's not necessarily a surprise to the military. It might be a surprise to people reading the newspaper, but
absolutely,
this is something that, okay, we saw them coming.
Pretty routine.
An hour before they got there.
Yes,
Well, that's routine
hours
stuff. Right.
before they got there, yeah. I guess the only thing that was really disconcerting was kind of the mobile missiles, and that I don't know how much I can go into, so I don't want to say anything I shouldn't, but that was probably one of the only areas when I was still in that we didn't have full abilities to kind of track.
What kind of stress? Intelligence is a pretty important job.
Yes.
It's something that you can't act on something if you don't know about it. You need to be prepared. And what kind of stress does that put on someone who's doing that job, especially when you're in Iraq and you're the only one doing it? If you drop the balls, people could get killed.
Yeah, it was.
Is that something that's in the back of your mind, or?
Absolutely. When we first got there, we had a backlog of the squadron doing this before us was often flying 6 missions a day. We mostly did 4 while we were there. On our light days, we'd only do 2. So we had a backlog of missions to cut and get our products out to mostly the Army units. And we were trying to figure it out ourselves and how to do it. And we got a phone call at one point, the Army's like, we haven't seen missions for a couple days and we're planning for this operation tomorrow. And I look at them like, oh my gosh, we have like 3 target development missions that have not been prepared. And just everyone in the shop just started cutting tape, and we prioritized those missions first to get everything we had to them before they went. So it was routine most of the time once we were able to get caught up and just cut the tape and send out those products as soon as we got them. But if you got behind, it was very stressful because other Americans could be in danger if they don't have the information that you collected.
How long were you in the Navy?
I was active duty for 8 years, and then I did the reserves for just about 9 months, and it was not for me. So.
The Navy was not for you?
The reserves
Okay.
was not my bag.
What can you say about your service? What stands out the most? What are you most proud of? That kind of thing.
Stands out the most is the camaraderie. Most people don't understand what it's like to pick up and move your life across the country, or maybe it's just a couple states over, or maybe to the other side of the world every 2 or 3 years. And your military service members, they get that, and they understand when a new person comes in that they don't know anybody and they don't know the area and they don't know their job. I mean, generally you know what you'll be doing, but it's different at each place. And the camaraderie you see is really great. I was a junior officer the whole time I was in, and the other JOs just welcome you in, and they help you and they teach you, and that's kind of your ready group of friends when you show up somewhere that's already there. And they look out for each other, they take care of each other, and they bitch to one another. But it's just part of the culture, and
Right.
yeah.
How do you think that particularly your wartime experience, now that you have time to look back on it, how's that affected your life? I know it's not been a long time since this answer might change in 20 years, but as you look back on it now.
Really, I think it's just that I have a different view of the war than maybe a lot of other people did. When I was in Niobic, we had a prior Marine who had been over there early on, and she told us she was a chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear person, CBRN, and told us some about her experiences over there. And being with the P3 squadron, I didn't have friends who died over there, but being there gives you just a very different view of just what's going on, all of it. Was it all a big mistake that we were there? Maybe, but it's hard for me to say that we didn't do anything there. Like, there was no reason for any of that.
So one of the goals of this project is to preserve stories like yours, so that somebody 100 years from now might see it and learn something from it. What message would you want to send someone who might see this in 100 years? Great-great-grandchild, or just somebody finds it on the internet, if that still exists.
I think just that military service, you're doing something important. It may not always feel like it, but you get to know things and see things that most people are not going to ever know or see. It's cool to be in the know. It's a little scary to be in the know, but you're doing something that matters. And that's why I wanted to do it. I didn't want to just sit in my hometown for the rest of my life and do exactly what my mom and dad did. I wanted to make a difference.
How about to a young girl that might watch this, who's contemplating?
It's hard. Being in the military is hard as a female, but it's getting better. It's by the time I came into the Navy, there weren't a whole lot of old crotchety men saying women should never be on ships. There was still that thought about submarines and combat arms, which is now open across the board. So it's not easy to be a female in the military, but it's getting better, and it gives you a different view of the world than you're going to see in any sort of female-dominated job type. You know, I was a teacher after I left the Navy, and all my friends were women, and it was a really weird culture shock.
Right.
But it's, you know, if you want something that's different, this is a good route to go, and it'll make you stronger. I was always the quiet, shy kid in my class. My grandmother was baffled when she found out I wanted to join the Navy. But yeah, I mean, it definitely, it builds you up.
Right.
Yeah, and you find yourself, I think, more too.
Knowing right now what you know, would you do it again?
Absolutely. There are little things I would probably change because I'm older and I know more and I can look back, you know, basically, you know, how I introduced myself and little things, nothing major. I would absolutely go back and do ROTC and join the military again.
Is there anything that we haven't documented that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I mean, when I think about my time in the military, more of what I think about is my time at STRATCOM, not my time in Iraq. It was so short. It was 6 months, and I didn't feel like our particular mission was exceptionally impactful. I don't know, maybe the Army would have had a different view.
Right.
Because the P3 was used for all the things I said, but in a desert environment, it wasn't all that great. At the we carried an aircraft full of 13 people at a time, and at the altitude we had to stay to maintain safety was probably not the best for that. But I think about doing, sitting on the watch floor at STRATCOM and doing space intel, where I learned so much and learned how big my brain could grow and trying to take in all this stuff that I never thought I would even be concerned with or want to learn about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask another question that comes to mind, because you mentioned STRATCOM, and you mentioned this earlier with the new Space Force. So we have a trailer that we normally do interviews on it, and it's got all the service badges on it, and one of them is the Space Force, and everybody laughs. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is there a mission that's needed?
I think it's silly.
I mean, could the Air Force or Navy do that same mission?
The Air Force has been doing that mission very successfully. Some of the things I've read about more why Space Force doesn't make sense is like, you know, the Navy we have lines of communication and we have shipping routes on the sea.
Right.
In the Air Force, we have air travel and we have, you know, missiles travel across the airspace, and missiles do travel in space, but we're not going to other planets. We're not even going to the moon regularly, and when we are, it's certainly not adversarial. I think maybe one day there might be a reason for it, but I don't think we're there right now. I don't think it's necessary. But some of the commands that I've worked with are now different. Vandenberg Air Force Base is now Vandenberg Space Force Base. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense.
Are there countries, particularly China, that are more involved in space than most people know. For instance, maybe turning the moon into a...
Yeah, I mean, maybe. China is the only country that has their own, I don't know if they still do, but I believe they do still have their own space station. You know, the International Space Station is primarily Russia and the US. China has their own. Granted, they went to the moon. I don't know if they released any images from the other side. They're the only country to land on the other side, to my knowledge. So maybe, but I don't know if that's, I mean, what are we going to do in space right now? You know, actually firing anything kinetic would be disastrous for the entire world. Even China learned that when they blew up one of their satellites. Gosh, what was that? 20 years ago? It couldn't have been 20 years ago. 10 years ago? 15 years ago? Whatever. You know, they were expecting to create somewhere on the orders of tens of pieces of debris, and it created tens of thousands. And our International Space Station is continually at risk from that debris multiple times a day, every single day. So if we were to try and, you know, have a war in space, you're screwing everyone because everything's out there, all of our satellites in multiple different orbits, and it's not all military. It's, you know, commercial satellites for our cell phones and our satellite relays and everything else. It would just be a bad idea. And any country that has the capability to go to space knows that.
I think people see Star Trek and think that's, you know, 10 years down the road, that's what we'll be doing.
Yeah, it's funny.
It sounds like that's so far in the future that it's almost laughable that we're...
Yeah. I like to look at what NASA is able to do, and it's incredible what we're able to see, but what we're able to touch is so far different from that. I mean, what was it, the 70s that we launched the 2 satellites that finally pierced the edge of our solar system 10 years ago? Yeah. So I don't think we're not approaching, you know, interstellar travel.
Certainly not that war.
No.
All right, well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience and the Women's Memorial, I appreciate you sitting down and talking to us. It was a pleasure to get your perspective.
I hope it was helpful.
It was. It was. And more importantly, I thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you so
hear
much.
that a lot, but it becomes cliche, but it is actually something that we really do appreciate.
Oh, well.
And it's people like you that keep us free, and we appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you. I always appreciate the support.